All right. Well, good morning and welcome to our next podcast. Today, we are exceptionally honored to have, and I'm going to do this just to poke her a little bit, the Honorable Debra Wada, the former Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Deb was also a professional staff member on the House Armed Services Committee, where she spent about 15 to 18 years, I believe, making sure that she provided excellent oversight for the Department of Defense and all of their budgets, which is a significant emotional event. And prior to that, she was on personal staffs on both the House and the Senate side. And she was my Assistant Secretary of the Army when I was a commander of Cadet Command. I'm very excited to talk about our time together. Deb, it's great to see you. How are you? Thanks for joining us today.
Great, Chris. Thanks for inviting me and thanks for the opportunity.
Can you do me a favor? Give us a little bit of a spiel on yourself and what it is that you do today and what you're most proud of.
So today I currently am, like most retired government employees, a consultant and provide consulting services to a number of different companies, including several health companies. And prior to that, I spent, as Chris had said, 2 years in the Army as the Assistant Secretary. But even right after I left the Army, I also spent 2 years on the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service, which is probably one of the most proud accomplishments that I think I have given even all the time on Capitol Hill. But yes.
Very nice. And Deb and I both consult together in another company that we do try to give people expert advice on at least the right place to go with their projects. So, Deb, I would love for you it's a kind of a politically charged year, and we're not going to get political in this, but I think a lot of people would be fascinated to hear someone who spent so much time on the Hill kind of describing what is the difference between a personal staff, which we highlighted you were personal staff members, but you're also professional staff. What does that mean? How does that work?
So for the most part, personal staffs obviously work on the personal in personal offices for members and senators. They're hired and fired by the individual members and the individual senators. So they tend to represent their member and their senator in what the individual member is trying to achieve. When you work on a committee as a professional staff, your job is to represent more than just the member who is the chairman or is the subcommittee chair. Your job is to represent all in the House, 435 members of Congress, or in the Senate, 100 senators. So when you work on a committee, I think you take a much broader perspective of the items of interest that you're helping members and senators try to achieve.
So in that role, I understand personal staff. It's kind of like working for a small business. And those individuals that are there, now this was something that was interesting for me, for the audience. I was a liaison for the Army, and this is where Deb and I met, is I didn't understand, especially for the House side, the staffers that are in the front office are very different than the staffers that are back in the district. Can you talk about the different roles?
Sure. So there's most offices have a Washington office and then they have what they call a district office. So the Washington office, normally the staff there is focused on developing policy, getting legislation passed. They do casework in the Washington office, but they have, particularly the farther you get from Washington, less exposure to the district. So most members have a district office that is in their district and is closer to their constituents. They deal more with the community, with the constituents in their offices. They deal with a lot of, I would say, private constituent services. So when people have problems with their Social Security or their Medicaid, or they have an issue with some federal agency, they will go into a district office more so than they would come to Washington to come into a Washington office. And I think not that the district office doesn't do much policy, but their focus is more on constituent services than it is on the policy making that is done in Washington.
Now, on the House side, which is what you described from my experience, is the Senate side any different in that design?
No, I would say that the Senate is very similar in design. But the difference I think is that the staff tend to be much older and they tend to have been with the senator much longer. So the tenure on the Senate side for average staffer is probably about 5 to 10 years. On the House side, you probably would see maybe 2 to 5.
Yeah, and that's if they get reelected.
And that's if, yes.
Which is, yeah, that was always to me would have been, and while you were a staffer, the leadership and challenge associated with the way, Article 1 of the Constitution is designed, where the Senate, the senator obviously gets 6 years, and that makes a lot of sense to me to build what they're supposed to do and create a staff that understands how everything works. But then the poor individuals they only get 2 years to do that on the House side. That's going to be a tremendous leadership challenge, and the turnover and the fast pace of all of that. How did that help develop you as a young leader?
So I think that for most individuals, it's I wouldn't say it's easy. There are probably more opportunities to find a job on Capitol Hill if you start on the House side. Obviously, there's 435 members, so you have more opportunities than 100 senators. Um, but it is a sort of, I would say, it's a training ground for people who are looking for a career on Capitol Hill. We used to have a saying that all House staffers want to be Senate staffers, all Senate staffers want to be House members, and all House members want to be senators, and all senators want to be president. So that was sort of the progression. I know this doesn't necessarily mean that everybody follows that progression, but it's a common progression that you see on Capitol Hill for people who end up staying more than 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And then you made the you made the transition then and went to professional staff. Tell us about that and what did you learn?
So I got to a point where I had enough of Capitol Hill, so I actually left for about 10 months. I don't know if you know this. I went to go work for the National Park Service. When I got a call from the member from Hawaii asking me if I wanted to come back to Capitol Hill to work on the House Armed Services Committee, it was something that I was interested in as I had spent time on Capitol Hill on the Senate side at the time when I left. And so I interviewed with Congressman Ike Skelton at the time, who was the ranking member, who hired me, and that's how I came to the committee.
Wow, that must have been fun working for Ag Skelton. What an icon. So go ahead. Tell us about it.
I was gonna say I've been blessed. I didn't work for a lot of members, but the members that I did work for, I would say were from a leadership style were very uh, people who I think that led with kindness and compassion. So I can't say that that's the case for all 435 members and 100 senators, but I was lucky.
Yeah, and I too was lucky to get a chance to get to work with Ike when he was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and you were the principal PSM for personnel on the majority when I was there, which was fascinating to watch that dynamic. So tell us, what kinds of leader skills did you develop and create as your own while you're a professional staff member on the House Armed Services Committee? Actually, one of the most you know, well thought of and what's the word I'm looking for? It's not partisan, it's bipartisan by every stretch of the imagination, because everybody understands the necessity for defense. You got to see that energy. Tell us about that. What did you learn?
Yeah, I think the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee are I think unique in the nature of, to your point, national security should not be a partisan issue. Not that it's not, but for the most part, that's how most members approach it. And so it was I think it gave me an opportunity to watch sort of the dynamics. We knew what the political issues were going to be, sort of the same standard issues you would see in any other debate: abortion, LBGT issues. So But I would say even sort of like for the abortion issue, didn't necessarily cut down party lines, right? But more to the point that there are issues that will divide the committee that had to be undertaken. I think that being on the committee though gave me a different perspective in how to work with others of different backgrounds, but also different thoughts and how they approach issues. And having to go through both that on the committee with the Democrats and the Republicans, but also then taking that and then having to go to conference with the Senate allowed me to develop skill sets that I think one, as a leader, you need to understand sort of what the priorities are for individuals to get something through. Two, you have to make sure that you bring everybody to the table so that they feel that their contributions and what they're trying to achieve have at least been heard, even if you can't get it over the line, right? And then being able to make sure that you have built a coalition of a number of different members and staff to be able to get the national defense bill over the line, which in this case means getting it to a vote and getting it passed into law.
Now that's, and now I know everything you said is very, very difficult, but you made it sound easy. But you didn't talk about, and I want you to talk about, so now you've got all of these 435, they're not all on the House Armed Services Committee, but they all have to say something that's applicable to their district and their state. So you've got all that going. Plus, lest we forget the 6 delegates who have some portion of that as well.
Mhm.
Then you've got all these lobbyists coming at you,
Mhm.
the defense industry, which is an interesting dynamic all in itself. And then now you've got to work that with the Department of Defense. And you're kind of that connective tissue between those 3 entities as a professional.
4 actually.
Okay, what's the 4th one? What am I missing? Well, Senate.
No, well, if you count the Senate, it would be 5. I don't count the Senate in the beginning because it's they're doing the same thing on their side, and
Right.
it's just sort of at the end we have to negotiate, right? So it's the Department of Defense, it's the member of Congress, it's the defense lobbyists, i.e., the Defense Industrial Base, and also it is organizations that represent military interests. So,
Okay.
right. So there's at least 4, if not, smaller interests that will reach out to express their desires of what they want to see in the defense bill. And our responsibility is to make sure everybody is heard
Okay.
and balance those interests and to balance those interests, right? So definitely we engage with the Department of Defense and the individual services when we have an idea that comes forward to better understand sort of from a policy level, but what the impact would be, but more importantly, on an execution level. Somebody could have a really great idea, but when it comes to execution, the way that a service or the department is structured, the execution may not be achievable.
Okay. So I'll take a deep breath and step back. So here we are, as Deb Wada. The whole world's coming at you from 5 to 6 different directions. How do you handle that? How do you personally deal with that? How do you prioritize, and how do you keep them all kind of in sync to kind of get to whatever right is? How do you do that personally?
Yeah, I think so. In every situation, I think you have an end state goal, right? That you are trying to achieve. Whether in the case of the House Armed Services Committee, we understood that we had a chairman that we needed to make sure that could support the bill, obviously because it's his or her bill. We have a subcommittee chairs that sort of have oversight of those portions of the individual parts of the bill that they also have a responsibility for that we need to meet. And then we also know that we need to get this bill over and passed. So we need the majority of members to be able to do that. And so I think once you sort of have your understanding of what the prioritization is, then you can sort of rack and stack the incoming that's coming at you, right? And so I just, it's hard for me to say what it is that allows me to do it. I think it's sort of having to do it for a number of years that it just becomes intuitive. But it is a sort of, you train yourself because you only have a set amount of time in a day to be able to do your work, and the work doesn't stop, and you have to get it done in certain timelines. And so you have to learn to prioritize sort of a number of different factors when you make these decisions.
Well, I'm going to brag on you for a second because you're being super modest, and that's your character. Is that you said it early on? You know, compassionate leaders who are doing things for the right reasons, and so I think you as a staffer and me as an outsider watching that process. And what you just described is, in my opinion, a horrifically difficult challenge. And it's just as soon as you get it done, it's kind of like tax season on steroids,
Yeah.
multiplied by 10, done on Mars on life support. To watch you guys do that from February timeframe to get it to where it needs to be, and then watch it debated and kind of drag out. But you guys are almost always historically the ones who get signed for all the right reasons.
Mhm.
But as soon as that's done, you're starting again. And to me, that's what I think surprising for me as a soldier to see firsthand how that sausage is made every single year. I mean, it is, one could argue, why don't we have a budget for more than 1 year? But that's the way it is, and you guys fight through that. But what made you stand out and different, and we'll talk about why I think the Army pulled you up and asked for your help, was because of your mannerism. First, you could tell, first you listened, which I thought you were incredible at. You listened to everybody who came in. You gave them courtesy and the time to hear what it was that they thought was important from their lane. And then you were very articulate to be able to show how it did or did not fit into the bigger picture, because you clearly understood the vision of your boss, and you took that and you articulated that to the rest of us who needed to understand what Ike was trying to do. And you were able to do that with the staff directors and the other leads from a personal perspective. You say, this is what we're trying to get to. And then we would see how we fit into that. And so you were very good about that. You were very patient about that. And you could tell your heart was in it for the right reasons. I will tell you that others didn't have that approach. Others were just, I'm right, you're wrong, go away. I don't have time for you. And they didn't have the patience to do that. The other thing is, I think that you have what we talk to our audience about is, you have a growth mindset. In other words, you will listen to all the facts and make the best decision or make the best advice, recommendation to whomever you're working with. And then you grow from that experience and you expand upon that experience. Many others I've met in the world that you and I were in had a fixed mindset. It was this way or the highway. And if it didn't fit into their nice little box, it wasn't ever going to happen, no matter how well you tried to present it to them to understand the why. How did you maintain personally, how did you maintain your wellness and your ability to do that in that very difficult and dynamic environment?
I think that to be able, because I'm not trying to play down sort of the challenges that you get when you work on Capitol Hill. Obviously, dealing with 600 provisions a year is a lot, but I also think that for me to have done my job properly, I needed to listen to everybody who came in. And I think particularly from a personnel perspective, we're talking about people and we're talking about their lives. So understanding sort of the different perspectives that people brought in also helped me do my job better. And that's how I saw it, which is why I think I gave people the opportunity and the time, because there were oftentimes, I would say every day, oh, I learned something new every day when people come in. And it may not in a good way all the time, but at least I learned something every day. And so and then you use that, right? If you are actually if you actually believe that you need to learn something new every day, then you take that and then you inculcate it into what you're doing.
Perfect segue. Perfect segue. So now here we are, PSM, professional staff member Deb Wada. The Army or somebody, I think the administration probably started the process, reached out to you and said, we would like you to become the senior assistant secretary of the Army, the #3 position in the entire United States Army. How did that happen and what did that make you think and how did that process work?
So the process with appointments are we can have a whole separate podcast, Chris. What I will say is I was in discussions with the department and the White House about moving. Uh, and to be honest, one of the reasons why I left the Hill, and I don't think many people, I've not told this to many people, but one of the reasons I left was the House flipped. And so the Democrats took the minority, Republicans were back in the majority. And as a result, we had to reduce the size of our staff. And I was one of the few that was retirement eligible. So they could, me, if I left, would create enough of a salary gap for more people to stay. And so that's the reason why I actually left the Capitol Hill and went to the administration. But that said, when I went to the administration, one of my former, I would say, bosses was the current Secretary of the Army. And so when he found out that I was looking to move to the other side of the river, he and his staff and reached out and asked me to come work for them. And that's how it happened.
And it's okay to say John McHugh, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, because John
My
McKean
old
was
boss.
actually a Republican member, and I worked for Ike Skelton, who was a Democratic member. So
Yeah,
yes.
I think that surprises people. What because when I left the Hill,
Mhm.
the administration was the second administration for Obama. And so when Mr. McHugh from upstate New York, from Watertown, New York, the congressman from New York, went to he was the Republican that was selected by the Democratic administration to be the Secretary of the Army, which is really cool that they do that. People don't see that the administrations have a tendency to do that, to get some balance in there, to get some feedback that's necessary for them to govern well. And so having John McEwen there, who had just become the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee from that transition, and so I was lucky enough to be his executive officer and saw those discussions with Ms. Wada. So you get asked to come over to go take this job on. What did you think? How did you prepare?
I don't know. Is there a way to prepare yourself to go into the Pentagon? What I will say is what I found and my expectations were very different. I knew that it was going to be challenging walking in. It was in some ways much more challenging than I expected. So I'll give you a little story here, Chris.
Okay.
Um, Obviously, being on Capitol Hill, there's a lot of politics that goes on. Obviously, on Capitol Hill, everything is political. What I didn't realize when I walked into the building is that the building is more, in my mind, more political than Capitol Hill was. And maybe it's because I spent so much time on Capitol Hill, it was just sort of second nature to me. But walking into the Department of Defense and in the Army, it was surprising to me as how much political the process was than I expected.
So when you say political, the process, can you define that? Because I'm sure people are thinking
Not
partisan.
politics, right? It's internal sort of like any corporation, it is an internal political machinations that go
Yeah.
on. I think when I first left the building, when people would ask me this question, my response was, uh, if you think that working on Capitol Hill is like three-dimensional chess, working in the Pentagon is like 8 or 9.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the dynamic that surprises someone like you when you come in,
Mhm.
that, there are guys and gals sitting at the most senior positions of the Army who were classmates in college.
Mhm.
And that's how long they've known each other, their whole career. And in the civilian world, you don't find that. Maybe in the 50s, you
Right.
would find that, but you don't see that anymore because the Army, all the services, you start as college students together, and if you stay in the whole 40 years, those people are the same people you've woven your whole career with. So yeah, that inner dynamic, which can have strengths, but also can have some really interesting weaknesses as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, and that's what you see when you come out here is, I think the one thing for me that was the most surprising as a soldier was, first off, I had to memorize everybody's names. In the Army, it's really easy. Their first name is here, Captain.
Right.
It's here, Hughes, and so I know it's Captain Hughes the moment he walks up, and I don't have to memorize the kid's name.
Right.
But it's not knowing what they should know based upon looking at them at their age. See, that to me was the biggest thing was I look at somebody who's 20 in the Army and I know he or she should know this, this, and this. So I can I can give them something, and I know
Mhm.
that they know that. They know how to do that. And then the older they get, the more and more things I know they have because we're all trained and educated in the same model. Out here, I look at a person and I say, hey, you need to give me a decision matrix on how to do that. Here's the 3 criteria I want you to use. I get a lot of blank stares, and I'm like, oh, you don't know how to do that. Then I have to remind myself, when in the
Yeah.
heck would they have ever been taught to do that? You
Right.
know, so yeah, that's an interesting dynamic. So again, I just want to make sure our audience doesn't think Army or any service is political in terms of the fact that they're all apolitical from a politics standpoint.
Yeah, it's the sort of internal politics of management, right?
Yeah,
So, yes, and you have very, I would say, you have senior leaders, but coming from different perspective.
yeah,
So whether it's uniform in your case, whether it's a career civilian, whether it's a political civilian, they're all coming with a different sort of mindset and a different sort of goal, expectations, all that. And so think of that, and then now times it by 5 services plus the department is 6. Yeah.
yeah. And then the leader of each of the services is a political appointee. And most
Right.
people don't realize that. They think the leader of the service is the general with all his stars and medals and everything. And it's actually the guy standing next to him in his 3-piece suit who is there. And that's why I always thought was interesting, because you'd see testimony for like the posture hearings for the budget, and you'd hear the Secretary of the Army say one thing, and then you'd hear the Chief of Staff of the Army say another thing. And people are like, oh, they're in conflict with each other. No, they have different visions and agenda to accomplish
Mhm.
based upon their position. One's political and one is not. And so I always thought that was a neat dynamic as well. So you're in this new world. You're in this fishbowl, and all of a sudden you're having to figure out all the cultural things and all the nuances and all the dynamics and oh my gosh, all the rules. Um, that you guys are responsible for that we actually do.
Right.
And so what was the I mean, I'll say that was a neutral observation. What was a wow, this is really bad, and wow, this was really better than I thought it would be. Any of those that jump out at you?
Oh, well, wow, this is really bad is we had an issue that came up and I was with the I guess I can say it now. We had an issue with the Army Correction Board.
Yeah,
And they were concerned because they were, as you know, at the time we were drawing down, so we had to. The Army's normal reaction to drawdowns is we're going to spread across everybody. And the so in this particular case, it was the Army Corrections Board that was getting a slice of the cut, and they and the staff came in and said, "Ma'am, we have to cut the Army Corrections Board to meet this requirement that was set down from higher leadership." And I looked at them and I said, well, what's the current, well, what was the manpower at the time? and I think it was a couple years prior, because Congress had put into a statute a prohibition that said you can't cut the Army Corrections Board. And they were like, we think we drew down the board personnel a year or two ago by X amount. And I was like, are you aware that there's a statute that prohibits the Army from cutting the board? And the response was, no. I was like, well, first we should probably go look up that law that tells us that we can't cut the personnel in the corrections board, find out what that number was first, and then try to make a decision and figure out where we are. So learning that Congress passes a lot of laws, and I think I would call it the dirty unknown secret, is sometimes laws don't actually get followed by the department or the services. That wasn't news to me.
Well, yeah, what was it? There's a book about how many federal regulations it takes to do things in this country. And the one that always caught my attention was it takes 44,000 laws for a hamburger to leave a piece of beef to McDonald's. 44,000 laws to get there. And so, just trying to keep up with all the different laws, because every time you put out the Defense Authorization Act, it includes laws in it most of the time, doesn't it? Directives, requirements, and
right.
And so, just to get one budget to read through all that and make sure that you institutionalize that across the board in itself is a significant emotional event for any organization.
It is, especially in sort of large organizations, making sure that the regulations and rules follows all the way down. Yes, it is a challenge and execution. So
that's right. So you got to see the results of your efforts on one side of the river coming over and not being implemented on the other side. Any good surprises?
I mean, the good surprise is that I think for all the denigration that federal civilians receive, the people that work, at least in the department, all the federal employees that I actually worked with on a day-to-day basis, were truly committed, right, to supporting the soldier, their families, and the department. So it's not that they were lazy or incompetent. It was just that they are often put in a position where they're executing regulations or policies that from the outside looks like it makes no sense, but in the inside, for a number of different reasons, as we've discussed previously, they're required to work under, and they do so for the most part. They worked hard. They knew that what they contributed made soldiers' lives better. So.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize what those people are, these career civilian government employees, what they do. And people don't realize there's over 250,000 of them. I don't know what the exact number is today, but over 250,000 of them who implement all those laws that provide that continuity, because those individuals in uniform that go through the Pentagon 4 years for maybe a chief of staff or a vice chief of staff, but everybody else is in and out of there, very, very almost like the House. They're turning over every couple of years and they're not staying there very long. So that continuity of the civilian government workforce in the Pentagon, and 250,000 is just the Army. It's not all in the Pentagon, it's across the whole Army. But yeah, it's great to mention them, and I'm glad to hear that. All right, so here you are. You're trying to untangle some of the problems that you were the genesis of for the law, but not the problem, but you're now the person who's been involved in all these personnel things, and you are Manpower and Reserve Affairs, which is personnel, operations, everything for the Army. And you're starting to check all those systems and figure out who all does what, and the zoo and the inner dynamics and the culture. And in all of this, you suddenly decide that you're going to play undercover boss. Okay, so that's our audience will know what undercover boss is. And so here you are, and you decide to do this. How did you come up with this, and what was your thought process?
So, having spent most of my time on Capitol Hill, the majority of individuals that I dealt with was at a very high level, right? At the minimum, maybe a lieutenant colonel, colonels, definitely general officers. And so my exposure, and I did not actually serve in uniform. So my exposure has been to sort of the higher leadership. And I felt that one of the pieces that, as the MNRA, that I was lacking was a better understanding and experience of dealing with the enlisted force. And so I was, went out to look at recruiting and training programs across the Army, and it just came to me like, why couldn't I just go to basic training and see what it's like? So I came back to the office one day and I said to my chief of staff, Mike, I want to go to basic training. Can I go to basic training? And he laughed. And I thought that he was going to laugh, and he was like, carry it out because supposedly I'm in charge. So about a week or two later, I'm like, Mike, well, how are we doing on my basic training? I want to go undercover. I don't want people to know because I want to get a true experience of what it's like, of what we're asking young Americans that to go through basic training are going through. And his response was, ma'am, I didn't think you were serious. So so we had a heart-to-heart conversation, and I explained the reasoning why I wanted to go. And I was like, it'll just be for 8 weeks. And his response was, ma'am, you have a full-time job. And I was like, but this will help me in my full-time job, right? It will help me to better understand, particularly if I'm signing out policies that are being executed that impact our enlisted force, then I should have a better understanding of what that really is like. And we came to an agreement that it would be a little over 2 weeks, and that we would make it undercover, that the only people that would know obviously was basic training, and in your case cadet command, because I did it the same thing for cadet command, and the general officer. So trade up, I have to thank General Perkins at the time, and General Coutier for supporting me, and I forget who was down at cadet command. General Abrams. Was it General
Oh, no,
Abrams?
no. Well, I was down there, Cadet Command.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Perkins was
Right.
my
Was yep.
at trade
So
up.
yes. So that's the reason why I did it.
Okay, and you did it. So you went to basic training and
Mhm.
you became private. What was your name there?
Private Underwood.
Private Underwood.
Mhm.
What did you learn? What was it that did you get what you wanted? Did you find what you were looking for?
I did. I felt like obviously one, we have asked our drill sergeants to do a lot. Two, what I noticed was obviously different leadership styles, right? So when you're subjected to a number, each basic training will get a drill sergeant that they follow through. Because I was there for a limited amount of time, I got exposed to many different drill sergeants doing different iterations, whether that was on the rifle range, whether it was in the gas, whether it's learning how to march, that sort of thing. And actually, I think it worked out better than that I was, instead of going through all 8, because I was then exposed to a number of different drill sergeants and their styles of leadership. If the administration had not changed and I stayed a little longer, what I would have liked to have done as the MNRA was to implement sort of a process by which we could track the metrics of the individual drill sergeants to see whether their leadership style actually had an impact on what our retention, whether soldiers that left basic training had a higher sort of discipline issues, that sort of thing, because I saw the different leadership style. And to me, I was like, we say we train them all the same, but people are different.
Yeah.
Leaders are different. And so is there a difference then in the outcome, i.e. the basic trainee becoming an actual soldier, and how does that impact their retention in the service and their accomplishment in the service? But then I left before that was implemented.
Oh, that's
But
interesting.
I would tell, so it did help though. I think from a different perspective, which I probably the G1 didn't appreciate. So the following year, which was maybe 6 months, 7 months later, I was back in my office as the MNRA, and a package came across my desk, and it was to cut the pay of drill sergeants.
Ooh.
Because the recruiting command had come in and asked for an increase in their recruiting special pay. And I was like, no, why would we do that? Where's the justification? Where's the data? And so this package kept coming back and forth through my office for a number of months. And finally, the Army side said, ma'am, we're not going to cut the drill sergeant's pay. We're going to find the money from somewhere else, and we will increase the recruiter's pay, special pay. So, because having had now that experience of being there and watching our drill sergeants spend the time and effort that we're asking and requiring of them to make sure that when a recruit comes out of basic training, they're a full roundup soldier, is a lot. I saw probably too much storytelling, but I saw, I didn't see. I was not the best recruit. So, we went from unit to unit, and thought I was being slick. So I was like, BB, she was my battle buddy. I was like, BB, let's just take our stuff for tomorrow. We'll just take our, like, a shirt so we don't have to carry a big backpack, that rucksack. We don't have to carry the whole rucksack. We'll just stick other stuff we need tomorrow into our rucksack, and we'll go over. And so we did. And then, it's now, we came off the range at, like, I want to say it was like 4 or 5. So one of the drill sergeants drove, like, there were about maybe half dozen of us back in the van to the barracks. And we get out and we're having dinner because it had already started. And one of the other drill sergeants comes in and says, tomorrow we're wearing long sleeve, for PT. And I looked at BB and I was like, we only have short sleeve. We didn't bring long sleeve. And so we had to wait in line, and we had to go up to the drill sergeant and say, drill sergeant, unfortunately, we don't have long sleeve shirts. So this poor guy had to go find us 2 shirts to wear. And then he did. He went down, the hallway, asked the recruits for to volunteer, which we know is voluntold, 2 long sleeve shirts. And then this was probably like at 8 or 9 when we realized that we didn't have the shirts. So I was standing there, and this drill sergeant is getting ready to go home. It's now almost 9 o'clock. And, it lights out, I think it was at 10. And he realizes just then that he drove the van back, but he left his car at the range.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So somebody had to drive him to the range so that he could get his car, so he could go home, so that by, I would say, if he was lucky, by 10:30, right? 11, only to turn around and come back to the barracks by 5. So, I saw it firsthand of what drill sergeants have to do to support basic training. And I was like, no, we're not cutting their special pay. We asked them to do a lot.
Good for
Now,
you.
did I see good? But I will say I also saw good and bad while I was there.
You're
Yeah.
always going to do that when you do that. So,
Right.
so then you come to Cadet Command,
Mhm.
which, for the audience, that's where we do all the ROTC programs for the Army. They come together, 16,000 of them in summertime. They're all college students.
Yes.
And there's a group of them that come that haven't gone through the ROTC program. They come to ROTC basic training, which
Mhm.
is similar but different. And I get a phone call from the Assistant Secretary of the Army, who reads me the riot act and says, I am to tell nobody that she's coming. And I think you were cadet, was it Ward or Garcia?
I think it was Ward.
I think it was Ward. Yeah, because it surprised me when I saw Cadet Ward when I went out to check on you. You came out there and you did land nav, you did road marching, you did all kinds of things again, provided me great feedback as the local commander, things that I could improve and do. But more importantly, there was the third, second, I don't know, was what your position, the third highest position in the Army? Was it the secretary, then you, or you?
Oh, this is the secretary, and then there's the under, and then
Second,
right,
then you. Yeah, so you
under
were
the
the
AC.
third highest person in the Army, a political appointee from the President of the United States. And you won't let me tell anybody it's you, and you want to go through it. And despite the fact you look 25 in this video, uh, you weren't as young as the other kids who were there, obviously.
No.
Yeah, and it was hot at Fort Knox, Kentucky, summertime, and you put yourself through that.
Mhm.
So, and I appreciate the story with the drill sergeant, because that's exactly what we would hope good leaders do. And I wanted you to tell, I didn't know the story about the drill sergeant, but I knew it impacted on you when you went back up to the top.
Mhm.
Any other things that happened up there that, not specific cases, but from a leadership perspective, from your perspective as being a leader now, and people are coming to you with hundreds of items that are, I don't think you probably saw anything under 1 million, probably nothing under 500 million in terms of decisions on any given day. How did you make that transition from a leadership, from the position you were in as a PSM? Now all of a sudden you're the third senior person in the entire United States Army, 1.3 million people. How does one do that? What were your biggest challenges?
I think I had a leg up, right? Because having come from Congress and having actually written the laws, I understood sort of the reasoning why we were putting these laws into place. So it helped me when it came to sort of the implementation side of it, of when the staff came to me and said, here's what we're thinking of doing. And I would say, well, good, but that wasn't the intent. The intent was this. And so maybe we need to readjust a little bit. And so I think that helped me in trying to understand how best can we get to what Congress was intending in a way that can be implemented at the lower levels.
So did you start off by doing that? Did you, when you gave guidance up front,
Mhm.
I mean, you didn't just wait till these things came to you. I'm sure that you and your staff would go through, these are the things you're going to be looking at. Were you able to give that kind of guidance up front? Or did you have to be sort of in the react mode the way the design of the organization was?
No, I think like even on the so on the civilian side, the same as the military, you get your guidance, right? Your commander's guidance. So what I when I walked in there, what I told at least the inner circle of my staff was that one is I'm here for a limited period of time, right? I was a political appointee. The end of the administration was coming up. So that ultimately that means time is of essence if we want to get things done, right? Two is I came from Capitol Hill, so I'm a problem solver. If we've got a problem, my job is to solve it to the best of my ability, utilizing the tools we have available to us. And so if having looked at the staff, and in many cases they had been sort of in a position where they felt like they couldn't, one, they kept trying to implement things that were not being what they believed considered, or were being turned down. And so what I told them was the under these two limitations, right? Like if we have a problem, you need to bring it to me as soon as possible so that we can figure out a way to solve it and then execute. And we have to do it in a timely manner because I'm not going to be here. Like you should not expect me to stay more than 2.5 years.
Sounds
So, right. And as you know, having worked in the building, things take a long time to go through the process. And so what I had asked them to do was to identify those things. One is from the goal of we need to make sure we're here to make soldiers' lives easier, right? It is not our job to make it more difficult for them. And we should support everything we need to do for soldiers. And then secondly, their families, and then the civilians. So that was the sort of overall goal of my intent of being there and the reason why I took the job. And so we tried to do that in a way that made sense.
so
But it
you,
is sort of a reactive as well, right?
well, but you set a clear goal, and
Mhm.
then you developed a sense of urgency.
Mhm.
And I think, for all leaders out there, and it's in alliance with Cotter's change model if you want to get scholarly and all that. But every change model, everything where you're trying to get to a certain goal, creating that sense of urgency. You use the shortness of your time. Now, you could have been rolled over, but you didn't know for sure. So you use that as a sense of urgency. And
Mhm.
so, and you're right, that's exactly what big bureaucratic organizations need every once in a while. What I didn't like about the Pentagon was if there was a crisis, things happened very quickly. Okay,
Mhm.
it make things work. If there was just the norm, it was very difficult to get things moving because crises always took priority. Now, a lot of that was answering congressional crises. The congressional inquiry was always a very interesting process. But I learned doing so many of those on the Hill that I would let people know that I can stop an inquiry if you would just answer this question or show me the why.
Right.
And that and again is a leadership technique for creating a sense of urgency for someone, is to hold something off until they can quickly figure it out when you're in a crisis organization. But I think putting that out there was important for your staff, and you did get a lot done. I mean, what was the one thing that you sit back and you think about your time there for 2 years? What was the one thing you're most proud of?
Integration of women.
Ah, okay. Can you
Mhm.
tell us real quick how that happened? How did we get the sense of urgency for that?
So I mean, we were directed to, obviously, by Congress to make sure that we gave women every opportunity. But it was obviously it's the execution, right? And there are ways an organization that may not support a decision by higher up could make execution challenging and difficult. But I think for the most part, we had leaders, especially down at the actual execution level, that were committed to making it happen. And it was my job as the senior leader to make sure that they had the tools and they had the backing to be able to do it. So even though they were uniform individuals, recognizing that the political will was there and would stand up and help them and support them, I think it was helpful in being able to execute.
Very cool.
So
Very
yeah,
cool. I got to do the one with John McHugh for we're getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which
yeah.
was really cool to be involved in things like that. So, well, we really want to appreciate your time today, and thank you very much for joining us. It was a great lesson for me to get to walk down that path with you yet again. And it's one of those things where you're always learning. And so I appreciate your time.
Not at all. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. And it's good to see you.
You too, man. Bye
Take
bye.
care.